Greetings, everyone, and thank you for joining me on this episode. You may be wondering, what did I hear her say? Yes, I wonder what your thoughts are. Like, what is a chicken coop? It's a legitimate question. Well, I'm actually going to share with you on this episode through a bit of storytelling. All right. So follow with me. Hang on. There is a genuine purpose and meaning to this kind of odd start to the podcast. Well, if I were to ask a farmer that question, what is a chicken coop? They may give me an answer that has to do with, a cage or space for chickens, right? I heard my husband talking to some of his friends, and my husband is not a farmer, about chicken coop. I heard him mention that phrase a few times. And my husband is a truck driver. This is back years ago when he was over the road. So that meant, he drove the big truck. He hauled cars. So his role was to load the cars up from the manufacturing plants or from the docks or ports if they were shipped in from other countries, and then load them onto his truck. And then he would drive across the country to deliver them to wherever they needed to be, usually up and down the East Coast, but sometimes he'd go out west. So he would get those cars from the ports or from the factories if they were built here in the United States and then shipped to local dealerships up and down all around the country so that, you could go in and buy the car that you wanted. So when I heard him talk about chicken coops, and I know he had a lot of truck driver friends and they haul all different types of, it's quite an interesting tangent that I could go on with you, but I won't do that now. But just as, kind of bring us up to speed here, the truck drivers, these long haul truck drivers that go across, they spend days, weeks at a time away from home delivering goods and so forth across the country. So in these trucks, sometimes you see these big container trucks or boxes. You don't know what's inside. They could have anything from paper goods and products to toys to parts, food, even if it's like a refrigerated unit. They take, food from farms, like big commercial farms to, local markets. It's just any number of things could be hauled by truck across the country. So when you pass these big trucks and you see the containers that they're hauling, you never know what's inside. So I've heard him up until this point, I had heard him plenty of times refer to chicken coops. So I naturally thought that it has something to do with maybe the type of truck that would haul chickens, maybe from a farm to where they get, prepared for consumption or something along those lines. And I just didn't think that much of it. That was just my, I hear him talk about a chicken coop and I overhear his conversation. It's almost like a foreign language to me. So I pick up for certain phrases, and that was just the assumption. I didn't care enough to ask any more about it. And a lot of time passed before it really came up in conversation. And I finally asked him, well, what did chickens have to do with that? I mean, whatever the conversation surfaced, it finally didn't make sense to me that he kept talking about these chickens, because I'm thinking, if they're a truck driver and they're hauling chickens, they can't be going that far. I can't imagine going across country with a load of chickens. That has to be kind of regional. But yeah, he was talking to someone far away. So anyway, it came up. I'm like, well, what does that have to do with chickens? And he just laughed. He thought it was really funny. I didn't think it was so funny. I was really looking for an answer. And he explained to me that chicken coop had nothing to do with chickens. He went on to explain that it had something to do with a weight station. And I thought, that's ridiculous. What do chickens have to do with weight? We went back and forth. He finally actually called another truck driver friend of his that I believed him. I had a little bit more trust. My husband's always picking with me. We're really opposite. I'm the more scientific and strict and kind of by the book, and he's way more playful and joking all the time. And I felt like I wasn't going to get a straight answer out of him. I didn't believe what he was saying. So he called a friend. We had got into a conversation, and he had his friend explain to me what a chicken coop was. And to truck drivers, a chicken coop has to do with, and I don't know how they got this name, but the commercial weight stations that sometimes sit at state lines, because long story here. These big trucks I'm talking about, the long haul drivers, truck drivers that drive across, for days and weeks at a time away from home. They cross multiple state lines, and all states have to comply with weight restrictions. The trucks can only be so heavy. They have to be within a weight range, depending on, what type of truck it is. And every so often they have to pull over to these weight stations. Like I said, they're commonly at the state line, but sometimes they can be within the state. But these weight stations are there to make sure that these trucks are complying, they're staying within their weight range. And truck drivers commonly refer to these commercial weight stations as chicken coops. Oh, they gave me a long, convoluted reason why it didn't make all that much sense to me. But the point here is a chicken coop to truck drivers. If you know a truck driver, ask them, what's a chicken coop? If they're over the road truck driver, they'll know. If they're local, I don't know if they would really know this. But if you know somebody, if you have a family member who's been a truck driver or is driving over the road, ask them, what's a chicken coop? And they'll explain that. You'll get something around what I just described to you. Of course, when you ask a farmer, you're going to get a whole different answer, right? And you're asking now, surely you're wondering, why am I bringing all this up? Here's why. As public health professionals, we often speak our own language and we understand what we're saying. People are, our colleagues understand, but people who are not in our field, who are not in this industry, are often confused and they're left to kind of figure it out and kind of try to guess what we mean or fill in the gaps, or they just dismiss it and make assumption and keep going. And we need to do better. We need to do better. We need to do better about explaining what we do in plain language. We need to do better about making sure that people understand what we are trying to explain, like by following up and circling back to things, and taking the time and the patience to care enough to try to make sure that they understand. And it goes a long way with even people who are exploring and curious about public health. We have to be careful how we explain that and make sure that we're explaining it in a way that makes sense to them. And we need to care enough to pause and reflect and listen to their feedback and what they have to say to make sure that they understand, right? So the reason that this came up right now and why I'm sharing this with you is surely we know all of this. We can have the best intentions and we can still miss it. We're always going to be a student of this. And in order for us to create the public health that we want to see and improve in a way that we want to improve, I think it starts on a very basic level with helping other people understand what we do and being able to articulate the value that we bring as an industry. That starts with this basic communication. So this was brought to my attention from the very episode right before this one. So this is episode 336. So if you go back and listen to episode 335, and I encourage you to do so, I had a chat with a member of my data team. She's an epidemiologist that works with me, and we are in our element, right? So we're talking colleague to colleague, and we're talking about some of the work that we do. And we're talking to those of you that listen to this podcast. Most of you are public health professionals and probably understand what we're talking about, but a lot of people are new to the podcast. A lot of people will come to the podcast because they want to understand public health. And it's important that I make sure that we take time to explain some of the things that we commonly throw back and forth in language. And this was brought to my attention through some of the feedback because the member of my data team, Zuena, was so excited and she shared with her family that she was on the podcast, and she had friends that were listening that are not